Good morning. This is Andrea Breitling with Mega Bitch. I'm talking with Glitter Girl today from the Red Bed in Budapest. And Glitter Girl, she's the most badass woman. I've been following her for years. We met through the fire community. Glitter Girl is a well-known fire performer and teacher based in San Francisco. She's the founder of Temple of Poi. A few things. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so excited. So I want to give just a quick introduction about you and why, and you're my first interview, so I'm so excited. I have a very short list of people who inspire me, and I love watching badass women do what they love to do. So the things that I have been admiring you from afar are, one, that you seem to defy your age. And you don't do any of the things that society says a woman of your age should be doing right now. And I love that. And you inspire me to want to do the same thing.
Did you see the article I just posted about that? There's
No.
There was actually an article published talking about how middle-aged women
Yes.
are experiencing a disconnect between how marketing, I think it was something ridiculous, like 98% of ads, they don't feel like really speak to how middle-aged women are today, and that there's an out-of-date perception of what it means to be a middle-aged woman in 2017. So
Yes.
Going around, I don't think it's just us.
No, it can't be. I mean, we're all living longer and healthier, and I think that the thing is we're living life differently than our mothers or our grandmothers used to live. So I want to just keep going down my list of interests, and then we're going to talk about anything you want to talk about, everything.
But all right, go for it. Go for it.
One of the things that I really admire about you is that you just say you have really strong opinions, and you're not afraid to put them out there. And sometimes you're really controversial, and sometimes you're not politically correct, but it's what you think and feel about something. And I really admire the courage that you have to just be who you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then
that's not an easy path.
No, it's not. And I want to talk about that a little bit too. And then the last thing that I want to say is that I really appreciate how you seem to lift up your partner, and how you are talking about how you are in love with your partner. And maybe it's just because I'm such a romantic, but I just really appreciate that, and I personally get a lot out of it, and I want to hear about people's love lives going well, and people being fulfilled, and
that makes sense. I mean, love is sort of the best thing in the world, so I feel grateful that I found a man who, I mean, it sounds terrible to say I found a man who was willing to marry me, but also the other half is true. A man I was willing to marry at such a late age, and especially since, I mean, boy, did I rob the cradle. I was 20 when I met. I was 42, so that's a pretty significant age difference, and there's no reality I would have thought that it would have ended up being what it is. But I think actually the age difference really served us, because my maturity gave space for, oh sure, do what you want. I was very spacious with him because I didn't expect anything to come of it. No attachment. Lucky me.
Right. Well, he has to be ready for what a 40-something-year-old woman has to bring too. So.
He's ready.
It's interesting because I just turned 40 last year, and I feel I feel reborn. I feel like I'm in a new time of life where I'm still youthful and vibrant and fit, but I've got all this life experience and all this knowledge, and I feel like you can kind of go two ways with it. You can let it beat you down, all your experiences, and you become sort of a negative Nelly, the way that I remember some of my older relatives acting, or you can continue to be optimistic about what you're going to create. So
it's true. Mindset is everything. I firmly believe that. So I think you're onto something there. I think that's a little bit of what the article was touching on too, was how women had different expectations of what their life was going to be now than what, you know, our parents or grandparents' generation might have thought.
And I think divorce is such a wonderful thing because you look at the women that we, you know, in our lineage, and they didn't feel like they could get out of these marriages. So like being an independent woman, being able to leave your husband, being able to get out of an abusive relationship, being able to have a job and a career.
And then the other half of it, like my half of it was, you know, someone like me was a spinster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being able to defy that. I mean, and there was a lot of that I had to go through for myself in terms of identity in my late 20s and 30s. Like, oh, what's wrong with me? I can't find a man, and da 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 da. And I just think the men couldn't handle me, and I also think I defy. I mean, I'm not a woman that needs a man to take care of her. And I think that was the paradigm. And I know there's only like 7 years between us or something, but I think that's pretty significant. And I think there's a really, I don't know, I feel like, you know, men who are a few years older than me, or like 6 years older than me, that's baby boomer. You know, they're a little bit more old fashioned sometimes, and they expect their women to be, I don't know, I just, they want to take care of them. I wanted to take care of myself. And I think it's unusual still, even among women our age, you know, I mean, I don't know that many women who got married in their 40s for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, I know a couple, but most of the people I know got married younger or just didn't get married.
Well, I know that, so I've been married twice, and I don't regret either one of those relationships. They served me in amazing ways. But I did notice that I had shame about being married twice and not, and being like, you know, 30, 37. And I realized, I had this conversation with probably on the inside and on the outside many times. I was just going to get married as many times as I wanted to because marriage is not an institution that matters the way that it used to. It is really important from a legal perspective, but we're free to have as many relationships as we want to in life. Now, the label you put on it is just your choice.
Totally. I mean, and we are absolutely stand for that because we're married and we're polyamorous. I mean, and you know, that's a complicated subject because, oh, what does that actually mean to be poly? I mean, we are polyamorous and polysexual, which I define as polyamory is having multiple loves. Polysexual is having multiple sexual partners. Polyfidelity is having multiple people to whom you have a committed relationship. We have that experience with each other. And I think it's great if that's not what people want, but also it's great if it is what people want. And I just don't think that marriage, you know, 100 years ago left a lot of room for that. But also you have to look at life expectancy. I mean, we are old by the standards of life expectancy 100 years ago.
You'd be dead.
I probably would be.
Only because you would have been burned at the stake by now.
Oh, well, that is true. She's a witch, burn her.
You know, I was just actually listening to a YouTube thing, and I'm going to just look at this guy's name real quick to see if I can find it. His name is Alan de Botton, and I hadn't heard of him before, and it was on my sort of like when you log into YouTube, it's got your recommended movies, and
Mm-hmm.
it was about love, and he was saying, he was talking about how partnerships were never based on romance, and everybody always had love partners, and it was only in the last like 150 years, and he said that he started putting a value on romanticism, and he says we're still in the age of romanticism. And it was so interesting what he said, and I'm not going to say it exactly right, but he said something about your success in love is based on how the generosity of your interpretation of your partner. In other words, don't actually expect them to act like an adult. Treat them the way that you would treat a child. You know, treat their emotional body with the sensitivity and generosity. Like, don't assume they're doing things because, they're trying to cause you some kind of upset, which is actually something on my list. What a great transition, that I see you say all the time. And I'm not going to quote you right either, but you say offense can't be given, but only taken or interpreted.
No, that's pretty much word for word what I say.
Okay, tell me about that, because I don't think people get that, and I think it's such an important thing to say.
I can't possibly know what is going to be offensive to you because it is a subjective experience. And I think that's the whole, I mean, John Cleese has an awesome piece on this on Big Think. If anybody is watching this wants to Google it, he says it incredibly well from the perspective of a comedian. And part of it is, I'm offended by people being offended. And there's another comedian, I think his name is Stephen Hughes, I want to say, and he says, you're offended. So what? You're offended. Like, what's wrong with being offended? And I think that's sort of a thing that's really come up for me in the last 2 years. Is it's as if it's a crime to evoke an emotion in somebody where they have a response and they label it offense. It's like, I can't control you having a response ever, but I come from the personal responsibility model where I am responsible for my feelings all the time. You do not create my feelings. You may create a stimulus, but it's my responsibility to take charge of what my response to that is. Now, if I'm just reacting to it willy-nilly and I'm just letting those emotions run me, that's also my fault too, for not being able to stop, take a breath, get clear, and think it through and just react to the stimulus as opposed to respond to it from a rational perspective. But I don't think people have those distinctions because I don't think people often think about the whole process of stimuli, response, and then that space between the stimulus, right? That's the stimulus. Ow! That's the response.
Can you give like for anybody that doesn't, maybe isn't following what you're saying, can you give it like a hard example of?
So I was giving a physical example. That's the stimulus, right? I just hit my hand. Ow! That's the response. The time between is that space. So, in an emotional context, that's obviously inconsequential. But when it's something like, I don't know, someone says, you're a Nazi, because that's going around a lot these days. You can, without thinking, when that whole expression, oh, I said that without thinking, that's when you take no time between the stimulus of hearing, I'm a Nazi, what? And then responding, fuck you, or oops, pardon. Are we allowed to do that? Are we allowed to say that? This is YouTube. I don't think we're actually allowed to curse anymore. I don't know. Oh, you can bleep me out. Oh, no, it can't bleep me out. Oops. My mom, don't be watching right now. Like, she's never heard me say that before. But anyway, I think it's that place in the middle, and the difference between the reaction and the response is, you're a Nazi, and me going, oh, F you, versus, you just called me a Nazi. What does that mean? Taking the time to actually break it down, think it through. And then this is sort of going back to what you were saying about what that guy was saying about how to treat people you love. I mean, I would say I don't know if I've ever talked to you about the soul to soul game, but this game completely 100% changed my relationship to the world. And it is a 6-rule paradigm in which you create a container, as my friend Mark likes to say, create agreements in times of clarity so you have them to fall back on in times of upset. One of the agreements of the game is presuppose to the positive. So I will assume everything is okay between us. And I think a lot of the times we all get into that place in our head where we start making up that little story. Oh, well, they're being mean to me. If you just have a generous perspective, I'm just going to assume you mean me well. I'm going to be pronoid instead of paranoid. So there's pronoid is assuming that the world is out to support you, as opposed to paranoid that the world is out to get you. If you have a pronoid and generous perspective with your friends, which, I mean, largely that makes sense. If you've gone to the place where you've built rapport and you trust them, like, why would you assume that they're out to get you, right? So if you come from that generous place in society, in relationship, in your listening with your friends, between the stimulus and the response, you can have better responses as opposed to reactions, and I think less likelihood to take things with offense. But I also think that goes back to Ruiz's 4 agreements. Don't take things personally. Most of the time, I think what people are saying is about them. It's not about you. And just relaxing into that and just, oh, this is not about me. I'm just going to assume everything's okay. And then, you know, the other half of the agreement is, and I'm going to confirm anything that I think is going on with you rather than making up a story. So I could be like, hey, Andrea, is something up? I'm sensing something's going on. And then you have the opportunity to say yes or no, but we're getting into shared reality with each other by having that dialogue. And I think what happens with offense a lot of the time is people make up some story in their head. They assume negative intent. They go to a place from reaction, which is often driven by past reactions where there was a stimulus, a response, and a trauma. And they don't ever clear out those old experiences, so they don't have the freedom to be with that space between the stimulus and the response. Instead, they're reacting, and it's all, you're a Nazi. That's just going to be my default negative one today. I've been called so many things in the last 2 years. It's crazy. That is only one of them. And I'm not even sure that's the worst one, actually.
Yeah, I've followed some of these things. I can't believe, well, social media, people think they can be cruel. I'm quite certain that people say things online they would never say to your face. But going back to the 4 agreements, this is something that I'm also interested in, and for anybody who has not read the book, the thing that struck me, or the thing that I got the most out of it, is somebody calls me a Nazi. The first thing I'm going to say is, oh my, you know, like the old version of me would say, oh my God, that's like, how could you call me that? I'm nothing like that. And, but really, so that is a sign that I am agreeing with them without thinking that, so there's a subconscious agreement that happens when people give us stimulation. They tell us stories about ourselves, and we just agree to them. So if there is a part of me that's agreeing to it, then I feel like I have to, you know, defend myself. But really, if I know who I am, and their how can I say this? Their opinion of me doesn't affect the way I see myself, then I actually don't have to react to that.
Absolutely.
And it stopped. So I read that book and I was like, wow, okay, what have people said about me, or where have people been acting toward me in a certain way that is actually that has been getting an emotional reaction, and I actually don't agree with them if I stop to think about it, and I just stopped reacting to the world. And
that's awesome.
And I think that that's what I see about you, is you just don't really care what people think, and maybe you do. You know, because you're a human.
I mean, I do care, but it's tough. I mean, you see me in Facebook world where it's really a crazy landscape. You know, okay, so I mean, well, you saw me when I had 5,000 friends. I've lost, you know, several hundred in the last few years. So I'm down to like 4,700 or whatever it is right now.
I'm not counting.
What'd you say?
I had no idea. I'm not counting.
Oh, in hundreds of people. I have triggered literally hundreds of people. And I mean, I have blocked some people. I mean, when it just gets too contentious, or people are calling me, you know, they're just not making any sense and they're just calling me names. There's no reason to be spacious with them if I've given them a lot of space. But, you know, sometimes I do for the clarification of my feed so that they can witness it and see how crazy my experience actually has been. But I think on Facebook, it's sort of an interesting thing because, you know, probably 500 of the people are people that I really value on a very personal level, that I know, or actually, you know in person and have met. And then there's probably, you know, maybe another 1,000 people who are like business acquaintances that I have a business rapport with them. But then there's these other people that I have varying degrees of, like, I maybe knew them 20 years ago, or, you know, I maybe knew them in childhood, or they know me. I mean, a lot of people friend me because of who I am in the fire dancing community. I accept fewer of those friendships these days, the friend requests. But a lot of people you know, because of the expo and all of the work that I have done in the community, they friended me because they wanted to be in the know about things that were going on. And as I started having these dialogues, people just, I don't know. It's not that I don't care. It's just, I don't know. Jordan Peterson said it really well in one of these interviews that he gave. He said, in life, you have two choices with your responses. And I'm paraphrasing him, so I apologize, Mr. Peterson, if I'm quoting you wrong, or Dr. Peterson, is it? You can either speak your truth or you cannot, but either way, you have to live with the consequences. And at the end of the day, as I mean, I'm an edutainer. This is what I do. So there is an element of provocateur in the entertainment piece, but there's always an element of education and civic contribution. I rarely do things solely for my own entertainment. There's usually at least 5 other people in my feed who will be entertained also.
About this, about the dialogue that you create with people on Facebook. So there's 2 things that I see. One is that you really encourage everybody's opinions, even when they're not popular. And you live in San Francisco, where there is a dominant way of thinking. And what I also, and sometimes it can be on and what a lot of people would consider an extreme end.
Friend, now I could call me an outlier.
Now, I grew up in Texas. My family's in Oklahoma, so I have experienced the range of political, religious belief systems, like personal, like ways of living, all of it, and it's all fine. It's just a matter of what you want. So what I have also seen in this, like, really, I'll say far left culture that you are very much a part of, like you're very active in the community, is, hey, they're people too, and they do not like it if you do not agree with their belief system. And so you entertain all ideas, and I've also seen you enforce a code of conduct when it comes to people interacting with each other. So what is that?
I don't know. I like to curate my wall these days. It's an evolving thing, right? I think it's because I watched so many people if people want to beat me up and I'm willing to sit there and accept it, that's my own personal choice. But I think it's inappropriate for me to provide a platform in which person A is beating up person B and they don't even know each other, and they're using my status as a vehicle for that. It's one thing I sort of feel like if I sit there and I allow them to beat me up, it's sort of like, I see it as that Jesus Christ moment of, let me turn the other cheek. Let me be that place for you where you can let out whatever that upset or trauma is. Let me help you find a way that you can heal and work through this by talking about it. But it's completely different because I'm opting into that relationship. It's completely different if they want to beat up somebody else. And my sense of, I don't know. I'm an Enneagram 8. They say this is a very strong part of being an 8. They don't like injustice. And that's sort of my thing. I'm not cool with that. Plus, I don't know. Not everybody's as comfortable speaking up as I am. I don't know why. I guess I've had many people, like dozens of people, I can't even actually tell you how many, contact me, thanking me. It's interesting because publicly I'll get beaten up, pummeled. And then privately, I'll get these notes that are like, oh my God, thank you so much. You said exactly what I was feeling. I really resonate. Please keep it up. But these are people who don't want to say it publicly. Some they work in public institutions where they're afraid they're going to get doxxed, or they work in places where they're afraid their coworkers are going to find out, or they know too many people that are political people and it would be bad for them. I think that's sort of the glorious aspect of being able to be an entrepreneur. Although I was very disheartened to find that somebody with whom I led a workshop, who I would have called a both mentor, colleague, friend, and peer, blocked me and will not even respond to my email, and I don't know why. Oh. And it's shocking when it gets to that place. I'm like, whoa, really? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you're upset with me because of something that happened on Facebook, I guess we're not really friends. Like, if it's that big a deal and you can't, like, I took the time to email, you won't even talk to me about it. Like, I mean, what's there really to say at that point? I mean, and that's fine. I guess I'm an acquired taste.
Not every, you know, I've had a few friendships in my life that were really heartbreaking, and they just left, and I never had any clarification about it. And and this was younger, in my 20s, you know, somebody that I grew up with who I was so close with, and she just broke my heart. She just didn't ever choose to let me know that she didn't want to be part of my life. And I realized I'm not ever going to beg anyone to love me or want to be friends with me or want to do business with me, because it's fine. There's there are people that are better suited for all of us. So
totally. In a planet of 7.5 billion people and growing, what's 300 people that blocked me on Facebook?
Yeah.
No big deal, you know. It's but I mean, oh well.
So I want to just tell people what it is actually that you do at Temple of Poi.
Oh, so, you want me to tell them?
Yeah, what could you say, like what is Temple of Poi? What is it that you do?
World's first Poi fire dancing academy. I established it in 2002 because the way I was taught how to do the weave, I mean, the words were literally, well, you do, then you do, like, so then they did split time hands, and then all you do is this. And there was no actual linguistic distinction. And I just had a huge epiphany around this, talking to a friend of mine that I know from college. We were studying computer science at the time. And I realized my career in computers in the 90s absolutely positively completely informed my teaching model, and understanding how people use systems and understanding it from a holistic perspective really helped me build a training model to help people learn how to do it. I was a super slow learner with Poi. I also started, I mean, I wasn't old, but I was like, what, 31 or something when I started. That seems old, and your brain is fully formed. And I can tell you, having worked with like 7,500 students over the last 15 years, I can tell you that, you know, the older you are, typically the slower you learn, for sure. Like my 22-year-olds, my 18-year-olds, my 19-year-olds, they just learn so fast, and they learn even faster now than I feel like 10 years ago was the case. But because I was a slow learner, I wanted to create a place where other people could reduce their learning time. And, you know, it's not for everybody. Some people, they can just monkey see, monkey do. They watch somebody do it and it's great. But for people who like to have that kinesthetic understanding of what's going on, and somebody who can correct them, and somebody who can't look at a video, see what it is and understand the words, for those people, it's a fantastic experience, and it really helps them get to the next level. And then of course I offer coaching, you know, across the board, not just from the beginner level, but all the way up to professionals. So I help people with choreography and performance character. And then I have business training, and I have, you know, coaching training to teach people how to actually teach as well. So it's a full-on fire dancing academy, and we've been in business for 15 years now, and it's fantastic, and it's the first one in the world to the best of my knowledge. And I just heard of another one opening up in either New Zealand or Australia, and I'm super stoked, although the website doesn't have any actual classes, like a class schedule listed on it. But still, I was like, yes, the industry's growing, it's finally happening.
You know, when I got to Hungary, that was one of the first things I did, is I said, where are my fire people? And when I first moved to Hungary, I was living in a little bitty town called Székesfehérvár, and it was the old capital in Hungary. And I was walking by some festival where they were like honoring the kings, and I saw somebody with a staff with some black wicks, and I was like, that ain't a prop. And I ran over to him and I was like, do you speak English? I was like, can we hang out? Can we? All summer, I ended up, you know, hanging out with this group of people, and most of them didn't speak English, but just I found the fire community to be very welcoming as well. In the U.S. for sure. I'm still, I don't know what other parts of Hungary are like, but amazingly, it's actually quite a big thing here, and they're really good. And
Awesome.
Who would know? I mean, I never hear about fire experience from Hungary. Actually, that's not true. Okay, I got to tell you this story. So I didn't have any of my fire tools with me when I first moved to Hungary. I ended up having them shipped over later. And I was like, you know, I needed to get a staff. This is the tool that that works with me. And so I went to the one guy that I found who makes these tools. And it turned out he was at my first fire drums like 7 years ago, debuting his, I don't know if it was the first ever, he says it was, the first ever dragon staff. And I remember everybody.
Gora or Mac?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which one of them? Gordon? Gora or Mactine? Who was it?
Gora.
Oh, yes. That's awesome. That's so great. A small world.
And I mean, and so I drove out to his to his workshop, and there it's like these big green rolling hills and this little tiny like little cottage houses, and I was like, oh God, this world is, what an adventure. Like I saw this guy and was so impressed with what he was doing, and I was awestruck at this tool, and now I'm here on the other side of the world in this guy's workshop. And
that's awesome. That is totally cool that happened.
Yeah.
Was this the 2011 or 2010 fire drum?
That was Boy Scout, Cutter
Scout.
Yeah.
Cutter Scout. Yes. The old days. The old days.
Was it the old days? I don't know.
Oh, well, I mean, they haven't done Cutter Scout since 2010, I think was the last time. Maybe 2011, but it's definitely the old days comparatively.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I wanted to ask you, as you work with your students, you talked about the different speeds of learning, but is there anything that they have to overcome? Because you're a facilitator of people's growth. So
yeah,
playing fire to overcome. Yeah, so playing with fire is like the most obvious, like that your fear of fire, and you and I do this, and once you've done it, the respect is always there, but the fear goes away.
Yeah.
So but what do you encounter?
I actually like that's the least of it in many cases. So one of the things about being an instructor that you don't have the experience of when you teach yourself is intersubjective reflection from the perspective of somebody who can see, ideally, multiple levels beyond where you're at. And a lot of my work is really helping. They say how you do one thing is how you do all things. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes things will show up like, it may be subtle, but I'll watch a client and they'll squint when they do, say, a windmill or pinwheel, and they'll like have that moment where they like contract and you can see it in their face and they're holding back. And I'm like, and you can speak to, oh, are you afraid of hitting yourself in the face? And sometimes you can get to deeper issues of like, well, what are they really afraid of? Like, what's the big deal? Are they afraid of the pain, or is it just they're not relaxed enough into it? And you can work through what that really is. Or, I mean, sometimes it can be really structural for people. It's not always necessary. Like what comes up can be what isn't working for them, like their body isn't functioning the way that they want it to be functioning. So, last week I had a client who has an old injury in her shoulder, and then I could tell how the move just wasn't working as well, as smoothly on the one side of her body as the other side. And then I gave her a stretch and she's like, oh my God, it completely opened me up and now I can move differently. So just being able to, I feel like my work is about being able to observe in them their self through time, I guess I feel like I'm an anti-flow detector. Part of my work is figuring out the place like in their body. Kind of, yeah. But finding out like being able to pinpoint that one place in their mindset or in their body or in their attitude or in their lifestyle choices. For example, I have a client who tends towards perfectionism, and as a result tends towards language that's disparaging about the progress made, which isn't necessarily an accurate reflection of what's actually going on, but it's in comparison to this in unexperienceable perfection. Perfection is an ever-moving target with Poi, I feel like, because what you understand to be perfect today is going to be different tomorrow, is going to be different the next day, and that continues to evolve as your relationship to planes or timing or the moves, all of it, as they all change, your relationship changes. So what you understand to be the pinnacle it's like, I use the mountain metaphor all the time with people. It's like you're climbing a mountain and you can be singularly focused on just the peak of the mountain, which is a glorious experience. However, what that means is that entire path up that mountain, you've missed the view everywhere along the way, which means you're missing the journey. And then you get to the peak only to realize momentarily, yes, followed immediately by shit. And you see before you a mountain range of other things that you don't know. So then you have to, like, how are you going to be with that? And how you were with the first mountain will probably determine how you will be when you see the mountain range before you and all this opportunity before you. And I feel like the whole journey of being a coach really allows me the opportunity to see that again and again in people at different layers. It's like an onion, it peels itself back. You may think that you've dealt with something, but then you don't. But I would say the biggest thing that really comes up for people is the positive self-talk, because it's so easy, especially, I mean, this is an ego-based thing, unfortunately, because we perform, and performance, there is an ego element in it. I mean, you could be the zenest monk ever, but you're still getting up in front of people and you're still sharing yourself. So there's still this vulnerable space. And there's,
yeah. And as an entertainer, it is, I mean, people who, like, there is an element of entertainment where you have to be larger than life and you have to be a persona. And some people, I'm wondering if you get this. I have been criticized for being too showy, or, you know, hey, look at me. And I'm like, when you're a performer, like, that's the only reason people want to see you, because you feel good about what you're doing enough to be able to do it in front of people and have fun and show them this. And do you ever get that? Have you gotten that in your?
I get less of that, but I think it's also because I am sort of like the not typical female performer. First of all, I cover up almost my whole entire body because I like to do raps and I don't like to get burns. Therefore, likes to do raps plus no burns equals skin covered. And also, I'm, you know, I don't have your body, which isn't to say I don't love my body, but I feel like, oh, I'm about to lose my battery on my phone. Hold on a second. Let me plug it in. I think that might be useful.
Okay.
Sorry. Wait, we should play the Jeopardy music now.
Jeopardy music.
How funny. Do, 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 do. Okay, here we go. Is this gonna work? Dun, dun, dun.
My response to people's criticism, like, if you're not interested in watching me perform, then don't watch me perform. I don't care. Like, I love doing this. Or if you don't want to be my friend, or you don't want to be my boyfriend because you think I'm too showy. So this idea of ego is interesting. Like, ego is a great way to level yourself up. And so putting yourself out there in front of people and being fearless is, to me, it's something that not everyone can do. And so when I get criticism from people, what I really am hearing is
their fear.
Is their fear about doing that, or they wish they could do that, or it doesn't mean that I think I'm better than anyone else because I choose to do that.
Right. But they don't necessarily get, like, I feel like it's so complex and there's so many layers to it, you know, because what it is when you've been doing it 8 years is different than when you've been doing it 8 months, right? At 8 months, you're just like, am I doing it right? Like, you just don't even know. Your ego is so, okay, so backing up, I feel like when we were talking about the 4 agreements, you were talking about not caring about what other people think, and then you were talking about being solid in your understanding of self. And my coach calls that being internally self-referenced, where who you are is defined by who you know yourself to be, not what the external validation of you is. Now, the problem with performance is you're doing it for other people. Therefore, you have to seek external, at least, feedback. I mean, like, whether or not you seek it, you get it when you get up there in front of the audience, like if they applaud or not, that's your feedback right there, right? So there is,
you can't be a performer.
Right. You're not performing if you don't have that feedback loop, right? That's diddling, which is great too. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's a different aspect of it. And I think in that place, so, you know, at 8 months, you have to be externally self-referenced because you don't know enough to know what is effective. And all you have is the word of other, like, well, does this, like, I don't know enough to know, is this entertaining? Isn't this entertaining? And all of it is defined in that way. As a result of that, you get into this habit where you have this crutch of asking externally because that's what you need in the beginning. And I think it's a tough transition to go from, is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay to, okay, it's okay. It's okay to, I know it's okay. I don't care what you think. And I think that's a huge process for people to go through. And it takes a lot to be able to step up and step through that. And, because I don't care who you are. Well, I mean, maybe there's an artist somewhere that's never been criticized by anybody, but I've never heard of anybody that's never been criticized by anybody. And I think that's just part of the landscape of being a performer. And I think
or any artist, like you said.
Say again?
In any kind of artist.
Oh, totally. Any kind, not just performance artists. I think it's true of art in general. It's subjective. It's like offense, right? Art can be offensive too. It's the same exact conversation about subjectivity. And I think that the challenge is when people come to school, we give them the flowology mindset. The first tenet of the mindset is leave your judgment outside the door. Now, it doesn't mean don't have discernment, because you do want to know what's effective and what's not effective, but don't make yourself wrong for the process. And there's a difference between assessing who you are showing up as and judging your self-worth as a result of it. And it's difficult, I feel like, for beginning artists when they don't have any mentors who can separate that out for them to necessarily have that strong sense of self, especially if they're like 22-year-olds who are still just coming of age. Because really, I mean, I don't know any 22-year-old that's even been an adult for a decade. You're just not old enough to be an adult. You don't have enough adult experience. It's hard to be externally self-referenced at that young an age. So you're coming of age, you're doing this thing where you're externally self-referenced in an era which is all about selfie, like
Making your
generation, the clicks, right? I feel like there's just so much out there that makes it so difficult for people today to come into an art form like this, where there's a performance element, and then be confident in themselves and be able to share themselves and not get caught up in it. And I think all of that comes up when you like say, okay, you're performing now in class next week, so let's see what comes up for you. I'm a pressure cooker for it to come up for them, though, so it's a good thing, because it helps them have a safe space in which to experience it. Like, I've had classes where I did this one workshop. This was one of the most profound experiences I had. It was 7 people signed up. It was 6 women and a man. The man ended up breaking his leg and he dropped out. And then the 6 women, and it was like a 16-week workshop. Each one of them over the course of the 16 weeks had a breakdown. And it ended up being so powerful because it was like a woman's circle supporting each other, where everybody got an opportunity to organically hold space for everybody else. And I think what it did was it made the performance so much more emotionally driven, and they had so much more fun doing it together because of that place of, yeah, we understand each other, we trust each other, we had this breakdown, but they all got to work through it together. And I feel like creating that container is really useful for bringing up all kinds of shit. It's not just performance stuff. It's anxiety or life stuff, or what's keeping you from practicing, or what's keeping you from self-care. That's a big thing that comes up a lot for people. I mean, a lot of the reason people don't take the time to practice is they don't have a self-care regime. Mm-hmm. Hence my question today. What's your favorite self-care ritual?
Yeah, I noticed that, and I was curious, and I actually had to ask myself, what is it? And I was like, well, I know what I don't do when I'm not taking care of myself, but what am I actively doing? I think it's hard to know, because my life is suddenly so different than it ever was. So I'm still figuring that out.
I think it's a great question, though.
Yeah, I actually don't know. But I know it makes the difference between the way I see the world, the way I experience the world. It's like, it's scarcity versus having plenty around me.
You mean when you're in your self-care practices, you feel less scarcity and you feel more abundance? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Because you're taking care of yourself. You feel nourished. You feel whole.
Yeah, so I want to what you're saying. What is really interesting about how through the dance and the creative collaboration of coming together in these groups, people have breakthroughs. And I'm just wondering. So I've been an artist. My career has been in design, and I've also led design teams for many years, different types of design, graphic design, marketing, but anyway, product design, so it's always been, user experience has always been in design. And I remember for me personally, as a designer in my 20s starting out, I took everything personally. Any kind of feedback regarding my work was like, oh, I'm not a good person. I'm not doing a good job. And I couldn't separate the feedback from my work. So like my ego was so tied to my work. The way I saw myself was tied to the feedback that I got from people. And so I think it's really important, um, in any sort of if you are in a management position and you work with people, to be really clear about the way that you're giving feedback
Mm-hmm.
to young people. It is an opportunity and it is a responsibility, to communicate really clearly that this is about the work, and to be in tune with them enough to say, hey man, I can see you're making this about you. This isn't about you. You just don't know yet. And so this is me helping to make you better. And so this is my call to all managers out there who work with groups of people, to be really clear that when you're giving feedback, it's about the work. And I really believe in this sort of bottom-up leadership. Like if I'm a leader of a team, I'm at the bottom, and I want my whole team to succeed. And if they don't succeed, it's actually on me. Meaning, the expectations weren't set properly. Like I didn't tell them what they needed to do, or maybe they were improperly placed in the position. Maybe they weren't ready for that job or that responsibility, and so they were never going to be able to meet the expectation anyway, or they didn't get the skills or the feedback or the time. And that's all on me. And of course, when you're in business, you could say, well, I don't have the time. Well, okay, that's fine. Some of the times that stuff is a luxury. But instead of telling people what to do, being responsible for their success. And I think that when you look at interacting with people in that way, it creates the experience that you're talking about, where people can come together in a safe way and have an experience where that you can separate your ego and you can all grow and learn together. Because I think when people are emotionally connected, they will do almost anything for each other. People aren't in competition with each other. And that, speaking of ego, I remember my very first fire dance workshops, where I felt like I was in competition with everyone else, like who's making the best progress, who's got the cutest festival clothes, and
so the third of the 3 flowology mindset tenets is just about this very thing. And what I talk about is compare yourself to yourself through time, rather than comparing yourself to someone else, because we all have our own strengths. We all have our own weaknesses, and comparing you to someone else, given your life experience versus theirs, is literally meaningless. You're just making meaning out of nothing. And it's really easy when I say it to clients, and I say, well, obviously you wouldn't compare yourself to me, right? I've been doing it 17 years. You're here, 17 minutes? But they can laugh when they look at it from that perspective. But I think by putting it in that way, I said this to a client recently, and he had a huge breakthrough. And I said, what I love about Poi is I can help you see who you are in this thing that's outside of anything important. It's 2 balls and some string. Who cares? But it allows you an opportunity to examine who you are through this external thing. And so I think you're absolutely right. This whole that I feel like that's the dark side of the that's the dark side of the flow community, is when it becomes competitive with each other, rather than I am in competition with no one else other than myself. I'm going to be my best me. I can't be you ever. All I could do is be an imitation of you. And I tell my clients this all the time too. They're like, I want to be you. I'm like, no, you don't. You want to be the best you can be. You may want to be inspired by me, but you don't want to be me. You don't want to be like me. You want to be like you, which is what I am like. The best me I can be. That's what you want to be. The best you can be. But I mean, I feel like there, I don't know. I don't think schools teach you this. I don't think college really teaches you this. I think there's a lack of personal development in the world. Like I don't know. If your parents don't teach it to you and you don't explicitly go out and find coaching models or paradigms for learning, how do you take on this whole idea of making yourself a better person? Like I if I hadn't been exposed to, I feel so fortunate to have been exposed to such a fantastic community of coaches who fundamentally shaped my life and changed who I am in dramatic ways. I mean, I used to be a blame person versus a personal responsibility person. I somehow didn't recognize that I had choice over my life, which sounds completely absurd given how I am now. It's actually totally laughable, but I didn't get that. I just didn't get it. And I feel lucky to have met people who taught me that, but it wasn't until my 30s. And I have no idea how young people today get to that place. And I feel like with college being, I don't know, I feel like college is sort of, you were saying you think marriage is an outdated institution somewhat. I feel like college is an outdated institution as well. I feel like the internet has equalized so much and it's made so much learning available. And there's so much free college education available online today, even too. I feel like with all of that being available, I don't know that it's necessary for people to go and get a degree. Plus, I mean, my own college degree, everything I learned in my computer science courses was out of date by the time I was out of school.
Wow.
That's cool. I mean, and that was back in the 90s. So, you know, well, I mean, I graduated in 91. So that's,
Well,
it's worse now.
I've heard a lot of stories about young people coming of age in San Francisco. There is a culture, and I'm going to say it's probably in Los Angeles too. In some of the big cities along the West Coast in the U.S.
West Coast festy culture, woo! I mean,
yeah. So it's a different culture. I grew up, as I said, in Texas, and it is, while the culture is actually much warmer, everything comes with conditions and rules, and that doesn't and maybe it's different now, but it doesn't necessarily encourage you to kind of look inside and develop yourself. You're looking to meet the rules and expectations that are put on you. And now that I'm living in Hungary, the culture is completely different. So
what's it like comparatively? What do you notice most that's different?
I want to be, I want to put this in perspective, but I'm also just going to spit it out and be really blunt. There is a feeling of negativity, a feeling of competitiveness, a feeling of jealousy, a feeling of fear when you interact with people. On public yeah, in Hungary.
Really?
In public transportation, people aren't supportive until you meet them. Like we were talking about how when somebody says something that you think at first think might be offensive, you like your reaction might be to just be generous with them and say, oh, okay, maybe they're having a bad day. It's nothing. Here, everybody. The sign of strength is to be tough and to be mean. And so with both men and women, it's a very, the economy is depressed. So people are always trying to get ahead. And sometimes people are jealous of what other people have. And it's funny because in the US, sometimes in like the hippie community, which is the community that I kind of grew up in and came from in LA, like being poor is no big deal. Being poor is almost romanticized, but here, so I'm dating a Hungarian man and he's telling me stories about how women kind of ask you these questions when you're, the first couple of dates to try and find out what your financial status is. And if you don't have a car, which you, by the way, just don't need here, in fact, it's more trouble than it's worth, they just won't date you. Now, they don't have a car, but they expect their boyfriend to have a car. And so it's very, identity is built on status and money and stuff.
Oh, you're gone. I can't hear you. Oh, I wonder if our listeners can hear us. Well, if the listeners can hear us, this reminds me of my experience in New York when I was growing up. I felt like it was much more about what you had than who you were, which is why personally I didn't feel like there was much in terms of personal development. Are you back or not back? Our connection, it's splintering away. The waves over the big, vast earth, they do not travel properly right now. Come back, come back. Okay, maybe now it's time for the Jeopardy music. Do 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 do. Key change. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Oh.